Okay, Antonio, happy to be talking with you. How are you right now?
Great to be here, Natalie. I'm fine, thank you. A bit tired because it's harvest time, but comes with the job.
Yeah,
Overall, everything's going well and great. Thank you.
I'm excited to hear that. And I'd love to hear more about harvest time in a moment. But to kick off, as I always like to do in this conversation, I'd love to start by asking you what you think or what you imagine is going on in the global human psyche right now. If we can play with that
Well, I
question.
dreaded that question because I work with science, and of course, to answer a question like that, I would have to do some survey. So I do the scientific answer to your question is I have no way of knowing. So what I could do is a thought experiment, however,
Yeah.
applying the scientific method. How would I go about it? So I would observe, and I can do that. That would be a sample that would be biased by the people I can see. And then I would formulate a hypothesis from these observations that I would test through an adequate experimental design and then analyze the data with some sound statistics. It sounds very boring, but that's how you actually get closer to the truth. The thing is, the hypothesis that I would advance based on my observations would be if this main feeling in the global human psyche isn't one of full and utter bewilderment. You know, I see people really baffled and at a loss when facing what is happening. They don't understand. They don't know why things are happening that way as fast as they are. And I think if we would do a statistic, if we could do a statistics of what is the most prevalent word in the mind of people across the human population, I'm pretty sure we'd probably have the F word pretty high up there, you know.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh, that's great.
People are, what the, it's
Yeah.
well, I mean, war in the 21st century in Europe. What's going on? Famine, now artificial intelligence, the sheer speed of things. Are we voting for these people? What's going on? I mean, I think there is an incredible amount of bewilderment as to how did we get here?
Yeah.
Why are we in this situation? This is exactly everything we weren't supposed to do. And we knew about it. Take climate change. We know about climate change for a good 50 years. The first person who officially spoke to the US Congress about climate change as a scientist was Carl Sagan back in the
Yeah.
1970s. It was one of the most reputed scientists. What have we done? We voted for people who said climate change didn't exist.
Yeah.
We put them in office. So what is going on? I think bewilderment would be probably the most prevalent thought on people's minds, but we would have to apply the scientific method to be sure.
I think that's a good thought experiment. I've just started reading well overdue, and it's been on my list for over a few years now, I'm embarrassed to say, but Donella Meadows' Thinking in Systems
Yeah.
book, which is just phenomenal. And one of the things when encountering such entangled problems, like why do we vote these people in? Why have we not acted in a meaningful way, given that we've had this information for at least the last 50 years? And thinking about all of the different components, relationships, dynamics that would have to be repurposed or changed in order to achieve the outcomes that we want, which is, a rich, biodiverse, self-sustaining, abundant planet, which we have de facto, but we're just, impoverishing through our actions and inaction. Thinking about how we can repurpose the systems that are in place now towards that end. But that requires such change that I think also the scale of the challenge is one of the things that's so overwhelming. At least I feel it to be that way. And when I've spoken to others, it's kind of, what can I possibly do?
Yeah, I think too that there is also a great lack of understanding of how things work. I mean, if you think about the whole population, a lot of people do not really understand what an ecosystem is, how it works. Why is biodiversity important? I mean, they feel good if they see a lot of plants and animals, beautiful flowers, and nice big trees. That makes you feel well. That's for true. But just how much worse would you feel if you didn't have them? You probably will only find out when you lose them.
Yeah.
So this type of insidious threats, they have this tendency to creep into our livelihoods by our own doing, because we really do not understand how they will impact us until they do. And
Yeah.
the same goes for climate change, for example. We know that we don't want climate change, but are we willing to lose a part of our comfort, of the comfort in our lives, in order to avoid the impact of climate change? I mean, maybe now people are starting to think, because we are seeing the impact of climate change still at a very mild level of what it will most likely become, but already enough for people to start thinking, well, maybe I should turn my heating down during winter a
Yeah.
couple of degrees.
Yeah.
The problem is, it is too late for that. It is too late for that. We are past an irreversible point where in our generation, and probably the next two generations, no one will experience the same type of stable climate I have experienced when I was a teenager.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite heartbreaking. I remember growing up, and I know this is connected to age and youthfulness. When you're in your teens, in your 20s, you've got the rest of your life, if you're lucky, rolling out in front of you, depending on your context and privilege and all sorts of factors. But there is this sort of youthful optimism and excitement about the
Absolutely.
future.
Yeah.
And now when I think about the future, and when I ask people about how they feel about it, there's a mix of feelings, including dread. And I think that's that awful sensation that we thought we had, dispatched to the past in certain countries. And so let's talk a bit about your work and what led you down the path where you're at the intersection of regeneration, biodiversity, health, viticulture. You're talking about harvest. Let's talk about what that is. Tell us a bit about what you do and how you got there.
Yeah, so I work as head of research and development for a wine company based in Portugal, but also operating in other countries, in Spain, in South America, in New Zealand. So a bit of a global footprint. It is a family-owned company, which is an interesting framework where to be, because as a family-owned company, there is a focus on the long term. Probably that's why they created a research department, or asked me to create the research department and do research, because long term is always present in the management priorities here. How did I come to do what I do? Well, I've had since a very early age a great attraction to everything natural. Nature was very attractive because it was huge, it was diverse, it was beautiful, and wine was there too. My family had people who worked in the wine business, so when we got together, well, this is a southern country, so we got together. We still get together at Sundays around the family table, and there would always be stories about wine. Like, for example, in this moment of the year, there would always be stories about harvest. If it was raining, or if it was dry, a heat wave, the grapes were sweet or not sweet, or unripened, or there was rot. I mean, plenty of stories. And I grew up in that environment, but in the beginning, I wasn't thinking I would become someone working in the business. I liked it. I liked storytelling. I liked everything, but I was going elsewhere. My early goal was to become a research biologist. That didn't play out at first, and by a number of events, I found myself in the university looking at a recently created degree in Oenology, which is wine science. And peering through the syllabus, I realized, whoa, there's a lot of research here in biology, so why not? And I just jumped in. So, cutting a long
Amazing.
story short, I found myself at 21 working actually in this company. This was the first and
Wow.
only company I have ever worked with. And for about 15 years, I was making wine. That was my job. I made port and I made reds and whites from the Douro Valley in Portugal. And because I have always been a person very much looking into doing experiments, studying, researching, reading research, and so on. At the point when the company decided they needed a research department, they asked me to set it up, and here I am. I
So
think
then,
I must
yeah.
say one other thing, which is, and that is very personal to me, is that in those days when I was trying to think, what do I want to specialize myself in? I couldn't make up my mind. I couldn't let go. I mean, I like too many things, and wine is a perfect and universal integrator. It's like a big confluence of different sciences, different topics. Everything finds an application in wine. So it became a proxy for me to specialize in everything.
And I love that you've actually got a route in. I was talking with a friend of mine, Philippe Matus, a couple of days ago. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy, and he does lots of stuff around branding. I mean, that does him a disservice, but he's also a philosopher. And one of the things that we talk about quite a bit is how, when it comes to branding, it's really important to be able to stick to one thing and that be your kind of banner.
Yep.
And I was like, yeah, but there's got to be a ways to sort of have the one line or one topic banner that lets you do all of these other things, which is exactly what you just described. So when we're thinking about wine, I know that in southern countries, like in Portugal or Spain, where I am now, or Gibraltar, where my dad's from, there's quite a specific cultural connection and relationship with wine that's different to perhaps in Nordic countries or in the UK where I was born. And so can you talk a little bit about this kind of access point of wine as this sensual, integrated, palatable way into talking about our relationship with nature, with biodiversity, and perhaps how that translates into the work that you do on the
Yeah.
vineyards?
Yeah, very much. Yes, of course. I mean, grapevines, vineyards, and wine, they are widespread in our territory. I mean, as you said, in Spain, in Portugal, Italy, southern France, all around the Mediterranean. It's part of our everyday life. It's hard to walk in nature here and not find a grapevine sprouting somewhere, and it's hard to drive across the country for more than 2 miles without seeing a vineyard. So
Yeah.
that is something that is very, very, very present. So much present as wine is in our food. In our society, wine is not something that you go out of your way to having. It's something that is there, present at all times. It's part of your household. It's part of your kitchen. It's part of your dining table. But then it creates this connection between the taste and the place, because we know that wines taste differently from place to place. If I have a wine from, say, the Douro or from Alentejo in southern Portugal, they will taste differently from one another, and both will taste different from a wine from Bordeaux or from Rioja. So this connection between the taste of the product and the place where it comes from is very evocative. It provides images, sensory images. It provides memories. It's like you are drinking the landscape. It's like you are drinking the place where you are. And it brings your experience about being in a place into your memory realm. And because there's a lot of smell involved in that, because smell is our most primitive sense and it's the least processed of our senses by the brain. a lot less than sight, for example, it becomes almost something that happens instinctively. You don't have to make an effort. It's not like you are trying to see when you sniff at the glass what are the notes that you can find to describe the place where it comes from. It's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is that you are in the place, you experience the place, and you drink the wine, and without any effort you get a memory of the place from the wine. So that, coupled with the fact that it brings people together, the fact that people usually get together either at the dining table or at any other place to enjoy wine, and most of the time in the Mediterranean always with food, not on its own, it creates this integration, and integration develops belonging. And I believe belonging, it's something very human, isn't it? I mean, we crave for belonging.
Totally. And it's curious because I think one of the things that I've noted in Gen Z, I mean, this is obviously a generalization, but there do seem to be certain trends, is that a lot of younger folks and people that I know, perhaps more in the millennial bracket, are now abstaining from alcohol as a category. And I think precisely because it has become so disconnected from the wider, I guess, gastronomic experience, the sense that these things, it's like anything. I think we tend to run into problems when we disconnect integrated systems and the parts become alienated from one another.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that everyone should drink wine, but like there's just something about it that is missing, that if you've been paying attention to like the news in the States and like Huberman Labs and all these people going, cut this out, do that. And I'm thinking, but where's, it's a personal take, where's the soul in just cutting everything out? What about a life well lived? And you mentioned belonging, and there's a sense of connection with the landscape. I don't know, it seems like an extreme and sort of verging on the puritanical from my perspective, when actually I think we've misunderstood the connections that exist somehow. I don't know. There's something in that really piques my curiosity.
The problem is when you equate use with abuse. Of course, abuse is always bad. And abuse of any type of alcoholic drink.
Or of food.
I was getting there. But
I have a penchant for chocolate. It's a disaster.
Abuse from any type of alcoholic drink, of course, is something we abhor. As a sector, as a company, and me as a professional as well. That's not what alcoholic drinks were made for, and that's especially not what wine is made for. Never to abuse, and abuse should be fought against all the time. However, if you fight use as a way of fighting abuse, you are probably promoting abuse.
Yeah, it's kind of like cutting off the shadow side.
Yeah, and you make it something, something underground, something that is uncontrolled, invisible, and that's where abuse develops.
Yeah,
that has been proved beyond any further needs in the 1930s in the United States with prohibition.
Yeah.
So the use of anything is conditioned to the effect that it has. And if you are not groomed, if you are not being educated in the proper use of something, as you were saying, it's not just alcoholic drinks, it's anything. I mean, you can abuse of water, and the consequences are terrible. You drown. Okay, so you can abuse anything to the point that you get killed by it. So if you educate people on the right use of things, you will probably get them away from abuse. But if you prevent them from properly engaging with whatever object of use they will engage, and then at a later moment where you as a parent, for example, do not have the possibility of guiding the person, they will be totally unprepared on how to deal with it. And we see that happening a lot with alcoholic drinks, which is a big problem. These are young people who have not had any prior contact, or very little, or sometimes even a bad prior contact with alcoholic drinks, wine included. And then at a later stage, they find it. They do not have to respond to anyone anymore. They are in the moment where social acceptance is more important than anything else, and they'll do anything to be socially accepted, even harm their own health. And I think everybody has a responsibility to deter that and to fight against that through education, through proper guiding.
It's interesting because as you're saying that, I'm also thinking about weaving it back into our relationship with nature and how we abuse all that's around us through disconnection. Again, it's this sense of, I think it's symptomatic of something much, much deeper and bigger. And that sense of not actually seeing the impact that we have when we misuse something. So whether that's
Absolutely.
Battery farming or anything like that, I mean, it's all interconnected.
And we must think that the progressive urbanization of our Western populations has set masses of people away from nature. And you see them having a romanticized view of nature that doesn't have anything to do with reality. There's even a kind of illogical sense that food comes from the supermarket or from the shelf and from a factory, but it has nothing to do with nature. And so when they go to nature, when they go outside of the city, when they go to the rural space, to the countryside, they do not understand why are there tractors working there. Why are they not leaving nature alone? Why are they cultivating that space and not letting nature colonize it? I mean, this is very romantic and beautiful, but we would starve. That is the why. So, is there a possibility of combining both things? I firmly believe there is. We have 12,000 years in our past showing there was, because we must not forget that what we are seeing in terms of farming intensification is pretty much starting after the Second World War. So it's like 80 years old. Okay. Prior to that, the way farming was done was a lot more in balance with the surrounding ecosystem. The problem was it was not enough to feed people, and we had famines in many places across the world that we don't have today. So how do we square this? How do we bring the need to provide food with the need to preserve environment? Well, the answer seems to lie in conservation farming, or as it is being said in the more high-level discussion forums, land sharing approaches, meaning you conserve nature where you farm. You do not send nature away from your farm. You keep it there, managed, integrated, as again, integration is key here, and you benefit from nature services on your farming, because that is something that happens. If you keep wild shrubs from your region, native to your region, you will have auxiliary organisms that actually will eat up the pest that ravages your vineyard. Okay, so if you put enough of these shrubs around your vineyard, you decrease a lot the need to use chemicals to control those pests. The same goes with water conservation. The same goes with pollination for those crops that require pollination, and so on, nutrient recycling, carbon conservation, water purification, everything like that can be provided by nature as long as you let nature stay in the place you farm.
So what are some of the ways in which you're doing that with the vineyards that you guys have? What's some of the cutting edge approaches?
Yeah, well, they are cutting edge, but they are not very sophisticated. The first thing is to learn what is there. And that can be a daunting work because there can be so many things in there. Fortunately, this is where technology comes to our help and allows us to have a better idea of what exists in nature, what exists in the farm, how much the farm is moving away from nature or is on the opposite, coming closer to nature. We can do that by inventorying the species we find there. And today, we still have the classical methods of just going there and trying to identify visually everything you can see. We are doing that on some places, but you also have more sophisticated tools like environmental DNA analysis that will recover a sample of soil or a sample of air or a sample of water and pretty much identify all the DNA that is present there, which becomes a footprint of every organism, every plant, every animal that was on that place for the last few days.
That's extraordinary that that's
Yeah.
possible. And is that
It's
a recent thing?
amazing.
Is that something
It's
which, yeah.
So it's also daunting because
Yes, yeah.
suddenly you find yourself with thousands of species in your list, and you don't know how you're going to manage that. Okay, so one other thing that we are doing, and a lot of people are doing across the world, is identifying what are the roles of each of these species in the ecosystem. What do they do? Many of them won't do nothing for your farm, but many of others will do. And it's important to understand, and also to understand what are the relationship between them, because some eat the others. Okay,
Yes.
so if you don't have the ones meant to be eaten, you also don't have the ones that would be eating them.
Yes.
Okay. Let me give you a specific example. There are some places where a small leafhopper, a small insect, will come and puncture the leaf of the grapevine to drink the sap. Okay, that's not very nice because it will dry up the leaf, and if this happens before the grape is ripe, it won't ripen, because there will be no leaf to make photosynthesis and send sugar and color and flavors to the berry. Okay, so we are finding that this is increasing in gravity, in severity, this type of impacts from this insect. And we came to realize that the reason why that is happening is that because of the intensification, not really of viticulture, but of agriculture overall, the natural spaces in areas that would have a combination of both cultivated and natural areas, those natural areas are being reduced in order to increase farming space. And this insect would prefer a lot more to be in some wild shrubs that existed natively there, but because they do not have any other choice, they will turn to grapevines. So if we bring in again patches of natural areas where the shrubs are, they will happily go back to their favorite plant and leave the grapevine alone. So this is one example of many of the things that we are doing in what has been called, I don't really like that term, but people sometimes call it rewilding or renaturing the space. I don't like the word because it conveys this image that you are taking the farm out and replacing with wilderness. That's not what we are doing. We are increasing the presence of natural plants and natural animals within the farm, inside the farm, together with our cultivated plants, in our case, with our grapevines. So we have shrubs doing hedges around the vine blocks. We have cover crops in between the rows of grapevines. And so everything, as long as we know what we are doing in terms of the species that we are bringing in there, which have always to be local native species, because those are the ones that nature selected to be there. And we cannot presume to do better than nature, because nature did that over eons, and we have been here for a few minutes of the planet life. But understanding is key. It's really gaining knowledge, building knowledge, understand what is there, what they are doing, what are the relationships, allow us to understand what we should do to let nature work for us. And that is the big challenge we are taking now.
So I'm thinking also about so some friends of mine who run a regenerative farm down in Murcia in La Junquera in southern Spain. And one of the challenges that they've come up against, similarly to you, is how do you educate other folks who also have vineyards, or in their case, the surrounding farms, that these sometimes perhaps more traditional approaches that would have integrated management of native species within the system of the farm, that's something that isn't backward looking, in some ways obviously it is, but
exactly.
It's progressive. Like, how do you change people's mindsets? Because that takes, I would imagine, quite some doing.
It does. And there is a factor of inertia in there. If you are telling to people who have not been trained scientifically that they should do things in one way because doing them that way is going to bring them a stable revenue, and you say that to those people for 10, 20, 30 years. And then after 30 years, you say, oh, wait, stop. Let's stop doing that and doing the reverse. They won't take it easily, and it'll take time. So in the wine sector, however, and I believe I can say the wine sector is a good example on that in many places, not everywhere, but in many places it is. There has been always, and most especially in the last 40, 50 years, a great synergy between research, scientists, and practitioners. Okay, so to give you an example, the Douro Valley in Portugal, where we produce port and Douro wines, 42 years ago, created an organization fully funded by private companies with the sole goal of bringing the most modern technical and scientific knowledge translated in a way that can be used by farmers. And so they have, for 40 years, they have been working in this organization with farmers to help them understand what they are doing, how they can do it better, how they can implement in their farms the most updated scientific knowledge. And that has been a driver for permanent, I wouldn't say change, but permanent updating of practices as a function of scientific knowledge. And it's been quite successful in that. My company, today, we have an internal program where we send to our suppliers every month a list of technical works, not scientific, but technical works deriving from other scientific publications, but written in a much more accessible way, adapted to the type of supply they give us. So in this way, we are giving capacity to our supply chain to keep on improving what they do. And it's a win-win situation because they'll be supplying us what we need to have. And in return, they will keep having a healthy business with us and other competitors, everybody around us. So this is not something that we do to gain competitive advantage. We do this to gain a raised baseline in order to do what we should do for sustainability, for gaining resilience, and so on.
There's a couple of things in there. So one is that you kind of like, you're talking about upping the baseline by collaborating, by educating, by helping all of you as a system kind of improve, stay open, be curious about how we can change for the better. But then I also wonder, in terms of behavior change at a larger level, policy is something that I know that you have to encounter that requires attention in order to make larger changes possible. What are your thoughts around how policy can be used to create more healthy ecosystems through the lens of viticulture, or perhaps more broadly?
That's a very easy answer, by basing policy in science.
Uh-huh.
That is the main point. And when I say in science, I do not mean to say that science holds all the truth at all the times. But science has something in terms of knowledge that is repeatable and demonstrable. At the
Yes.
same time, it is part of science to know the knowns, but also to know the unknowns. So the identification and measurement of uncertainty is also part of science. So we do not just have information on what is known, we also have information on the limits of what is known. That provides a decision maker or a policy maker with the capacity to make a decision fully aware that there is a probability that he is right and there is a probability that he is wrong. And
Yeah.
so he can choose which of the options will give him the highest probability of getting it right. But unfortunately, what we see most of the time is that the majority of policy making is done without any consideration for science. That is a problem. That is something I work hard every day in order to change. It's an uphill battle, but we are making some progress, and I think that's really good. Actually, for example, what was agreed by the end of last year in Montreal with the new global biodiversity framework of the United Nations Convention for Biodiversity is a good example of that, because those were decisions made based on existing, sound, high quality science across the world. And I think that was a watershed moment.
And how much do you think there is? Maybe let me reframe this, because obviously there's the kind of going where the science is pointing, but then also there are so many vested interests in not taking approaches that are going to reduce our dependence on industries that are going to, increase yield in the short term, but destroy rivers and all the rest of it. So how do we go about also changing incentives? Because we're talking about systemic change, and obviously these things
Yeah.
take time. Have you
Yeah.
seen examples where people have been able to influence leaders to shift their incentives and to align with the science to be able to make the changes required for a healthier planet?
Absolutely. Let me go back again to this meeting in December in Montreal.
Yeah.
That was a very, very good example of that because there was a big push by a large number of companies across the world towards the negotiators there in order to have higher ambition in terms of the policies that they were agreeing with, namely ambition in making it mandatory for companies to disclose their impacts and their dependencies on nature. Because only by this transparency can we, as a whole, ensure that we won't have a loss of what is the base of our business.
Yeah.
We have a business based on nature. If we don't have nature, we don't have business. There's an organization I work with who has a very good catchphrase, which is there is no business in a dead planet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Any
and
kind
this
of
was
business.
the message that these 700 companies took to Montreal in the last December and told negotiators, and actually negotiators changed their stance and incorporated in the final text of the agreement things like the disclosure of dependencies and impacts on nature, but also things like the repurposing of environmentally harmful subsidies, which, as we know, is one of the major factors destroying nature today. So,
Yeah.
yeah, there is a role for the private sector to work towards improving the situation and assisting policymakers in passing the right policies to do just that.
So something else that I'm excited to ask you about, which is not kind of on the same scale, but you've talked about it when we met on the Camino, is the biodiversity trail that you have around the vineyard in Porto. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because that sounds just very inspiring and exciting. Can you share
Yeah,
what that is?
it's again the result of years of research and studies. So we have done that. This trail is set in a vineyard in the center of the Douro Valley, a place where for the last 20 years we have done a number of very interesting studies on biodiversity. I don't know if you recall, like 12 years ago, there was a campaign in Britain about protecting pollinators. It was called Operation Pollinator. It started with bringing bumblebees to British farms, and then it extended onto a wider understanding of important pollinators and fostering their presence in British farms. We have done a replication of that back in 2009, 2010 in this property. And we have understood, even though pollinators are not really important for the grapevine itself, because it's a self-pollinating variety, because it has female and male organs in each flower. Pollinators are, however, very important in making sure we have a natural renewal of wild species of herbs, grasses, bushes in the space where we farm. And so we understood that fostering the presence of those pollinators there was actually very important to our crop and our production in there. So this is just one example. We have others. We compared, for example, the biodiversity in the landscape of the Douro Valley to the biodiversity in the landscape in other wine regions across Europe, in Loire Valley, in Bordeaux, in Rioja, in Spain, in Italy. And we understood that because of the characteristics of the Douro Valley being a mountain wine region set in the place where it is with the specific climate it's got, it's actually a haven for biodiversity. It's one of the most biodiverse wine regions in Europe. And so accumulating all this knowledge, it suddenly dawned on us that this was not just important in order to manage sustainably our farm. It was also very important to raise awareness within consumers that a well-managed, sustainable vineyard can actually be something that provides a sense of knowing and a sense of doing the right thing when you buy a wine coming from that place. So we have a visitor center on that farm, and we decided to create a 1 kilometer, well, almost 1 mile trail around the vineyards with signs explaining what is happening at each place in terms of how are we keeping and conserving biodiversity, and how is that biodiversity working for us and for the grapes and wines we produce there. At the same time, we wanted to make it very interactive. So the tour is self-guided. We don't have a guide to go with people. So they go alone. They take the time they want. They will have all these panels with information as they go along the way. And in the panels, they are challenged to interact, to touch, to smell, to look, to hear. So it's the birds,
multisensory.
It's the insects. Exactly. It's a multisensory experience. And then in the end of the trail, they come to our cellar door, and if they want, they can taste the wines we produce there. And we close the circle by doing that, because they have been, as you were saying, having this multisensory experience of place, of the landscape, and then they drink it. Then they savor the landscape, and they get the memory, and they go back to their homes, and they will never forget that. And next time they see a bottle of that region, they will remember that in that place, people are taking care of nature. And so they can also participate on that by choosing for their consumption a wine from that place.
I love that. There's something also about the phrase that's coming to mind is slowing down to smell the roses, or stopping to smell the roses, and about the fact that it is multisensory and that it is going on a walk, and it's about tuning into the life that's around you and under your feet. And one of the things that I know that we've chatted about in the past, and it would be nice to weave it in here, is around the role of technology across the full range for good all the way over for bad, and how in some instances it can be used to be extraordinarily beneficial and to gather data and to learn and to change our approaches and adapt. And on the flip side, it feels to me that there's this mass acceleration of, I don't really want to use the word progress, because I think progress isn't just getting faster and better. It's kind of talking about optimizing, but to what end? And I wonder what you think about the ways in which technology are being used to create this cultural acceleration, so that we're so busy and fragmented, and you mentioned the word bewilderment at the head of our conversation, that it can be quite hard to stop or slow down enough to reconnect, as you've described, in the vineyard, or even with our local park, or the plants in our apartment or house. What thoughts do you have about that sort of acceleration in technology?
Well, I guess that is perhaps our generation greatest challenge, because we are now educating younger generations to a level of speed that the human mind can hardly go with.
And we can't keep up.
The number of threats that can come out of that is just mind-boggling, because the natural tendency will be to say, well, if I can't keep up, let's just let it happen and see what comes. Okay, and that can be very dangerous. My generation, I'm getting 57 now, so I am a Gen Xer. My generation has seen it happening. I'm from a time in my country, in Portugal, that where, as a teenager, I felt bored. And one of the most scary things I see today with younger people, I have a 24-year-old daughter, I have seen it with her many times, is that they never feel bored. They feel overwhelmed. They feel anxious, but they don't feel bored. They have no time to feel bored. The number of solicitations, the number of opportunities is just impossible to manage, especially if you are a curious people and you want to try as much as you can. And that is most surely one of the greatest drivers of anxiety in this younger generation. So when I was on my 16, 17 years old, we had 2 channels in our TV, and they would be on between 5 p.m. and midnight. So we had plenty of time to do other stuff and plenty of time to get bored. I don't have time to be bored anymore. I hardly have time today to cope, not just with what I have to do professionally, but also with everything I have to do in my spare time, because I want to do so many things. And I have the possibility, the affordability, and the interest to do them. And being a person who is very curious, I abhor the idea of letting go of something that I will never experience. But I'm coming to terms that there will be more and more things I will never have the time or the possibility or the priority to experience, because it's just too much. Okay, so this is me who came from one situation to another. People who are born into this situation, you could expect them to be more adapted, like when we say that digital born people are more open and more intuitive towards technology than people who were born before the digital age. However, I'm not seeing that, and everything I am reading doesn't point towards the situation where this younger generation is better prepared, better equipped to deal with this immensity of solicitations and with the speed to which they have to choose what to do at each moment. So how do we solve this? I don't know. To be honest, this is one of the things I wish I knew. The thing is, every time we inch closer to a stable situation, we are overcome by developments. And there are a number of things that come that didn't exist before, and we are again even farther behind than we were in the first place. So it's a challenge. It's difficult.
It's a challenge. It's tricky. I've been thinking about this increasingly, the sense of what it feels like to be in a system that is so restless that you can't keep up with it. It's not operating at human speed. It's operating at technological speed, which is it's accelerating ever more rapidly. And what could an antidote to that look like? And I think for me, it's as simple and as difficult as, for instance, time boxing a period of however, it could be weeks, it could be days, it could be a question of hours, where we know that for that period of time, we can dive into an activity that is not mediated by any form of let's say electrical technology. I'm thinking here more about computers and phones and stuff. But for instance, going for a walk or being in community, or you mentioned sitting around the table with your family on a Sunday.
Sure.
And for folks who are not born into religious contexts where there are more of these rituals and rhythms that exist as part of the kind of the fabric of daily life or monthly life, where there are cycles of ritual and ceremony, it can be quite hard to realize that you have that possibility to say, okay, well, maybe I'm not, Christian and I'm not going to do a Sunday dinner with my family, or I'm not Jewish and I'm not going to have a Shabbat. But there are wisdom traditions that we can turn to and say, well, how did people do this before? And bake that in somehow into our lives in a way that cultivates belonging and that unhooks us from this perpetual wheel of quote unquote progress. Because I think without the possibility to feel into what's beneath the restlessness, the anxiety, how are we possibly going to form meaningful sense of resilience or connection or self in relationship to the wider web? Because we're just so atomized.
I agree with that. However, it still doesn't stop you from having to accept that you will not have things that you would like very much to have. So you have to make that decision.
You have to give something up. There's that kind of compromise.
You have to give stuff up. And that brings a big risk for younger people of radicalization. Because, as you were saying, it requires human interaction. It will be very difficult for people to do this on their own, alone.
Yes.
They require a group. And this is where radical ideas can take ground and actually subvert the person from a situation where they felt at a complete loss to a situation that in order to feel they belong, they will accept notions and ideas that they wouldn't otherwise. This is the ground for extremism, and this is the ground for radicalization. So I think that socially we would require an evolution in terms of accepting that this is a reality and finding ways of coping with that reality within the realm of our own mainstream groups, social groups, on family-based societies through the family, on other societal types with the base groups that are the units of their societies. This is, of course, easier said than done, but it's not impossible. You mentioned, for example, Sunday lunches that I referred to with my family. When we have these today, we have young kids there at between 6, 10, 12. And of course, we don't want them, we grown-ups, we don't want them to be at the table with their cell phones or with their Game Boys and other type of screens or whatever. And the result is that, of course, they will obey us because they have no other chance, but they will be miserable for the whole process. It's not doing what it is meant to do for them. It's not creating on them the well-being of being in a group to which they belong. For them, they are undergoing a sacrifice.
Yeah.
You know, So realizing this, we tried in my family to have a kind of mixed situation where we allow at some moments during the meal, for example, in the immediate first minutes or after dessert, to be with their screens if they want to, but at the same time try to interest them in what we are talking about, and not just talk about grown-up stuff, also
Yeah.
engage with them, to ask them about their friends, about school, how things are going, or if we find something that interests them, try to pull that thread and have them talk about it. It doesn't work all the time. I have to be honest. It doesn't. But when it works, it's fun. It's fun.
And it provides then the experience in them of that being something that's
Yeah.
accessible, that they've had experiences in their childhood of sitting around the table,
Yeah.
of being engaged with other people. So I realize we're coming quite close to time for this part of our conversation, and I'd love to close with 2 questions.
Okay.
The first is, when things get difficult or overwhelming, how do you orient yourself towards life and beauty on dark days?
Well, I have my own tool for that. I have the chance of living near the Atlantic Ocean. So what does it for me is getting out of my office earlier than usual, driving to the coast, and getting out of the car, sitting in the sand or in a rock, just contemplating the sunset. And it works for me all the time because the beauty of it, I mean, if I am allowed the benefit of experiencing that beauty, then I have to be loved by someone. And it integrates me.
That is a really moving answer.
Yeah.
And finally, a much more mundane question following that, which feels like a bit of a clunk. If people want to find out more about your work, the business that you're working with, the biodiversity tour, the vineyards, where are the best places for them to go find you?
Well, I would recommend LinkedIn. I am on that network. I do posts. I mean, not every day, but I do post with some frequency on what is going on in LinkedIn. If they want to get some more detailed information, they can always go to my company's webpage. I have a space there dedicated to research and development, where all our projects and results are showcased and demonstrated. So that would be www.sogrape, SOGRAPE.com. COM. And then just look for the research area and the detail is there. But the easiest way would be LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's been such a joyful and wide-ranging conversation.
Thank you. I mean, you really picked my brain. It was fun. Thank you, Natalie.